So, like many of us, maybe you're also thinking that Japan is a wonderful place with many great things to offer. And maybe because of that, you're also considering the possibility of coming to live in this country in the near future. But you've also heard from your friends and acquaintances and maybe even people on this platform say that coming to live in Japan is nothing compared to how it seems when you come visit. You've heard all the horror stories, from the nightmarish working conditions when you work for a Japanese company to things like isolation, the language barrier, and many other terrible things. However, as a business owner who's been running and managing my own business in Tokyo, Japan for over 6 years, I'm here today to tell you the truth. Now, it is true that there are many people out there who say that coming to visit Japan is a great thing. There are many great things that the country can offer you, but actually living here is an entirely different story. Because of things like the work culture, having difficulty feeling integrated, having difficulty with the language and the way things work in this country and so on. And this is not entirely unreasonable because, after all, the work culture can be a nightmare. And I know there are many of you out there who would actually love the idea of coming to live in a country like this one, but hesitate making the move because of these things exactly. But I would like to argue that those two things, working in a country and living in a country, are two separate and very different things. And just because one of them has the reputation of being very bad, it doesn't mean that the quality of all others has to be the same. But of course, you'll always find people online who like to dramatize and exaggerate these kinds of things for any number of reasons. Could be for attention, could be for clicks, but it's all akin to taking a bite out of an apple and then going on social platforms and claiming that you know what every fruit tastes like. And it just so happens that there's a reasonable number of people on this platform who come to this country to do the same types of jobs, and it's generally being an English teacher, for example. I'm sure you know the type, and there's really nothing wrong with that. It's a perfectly reasonable life to make your living. But many of them come here and then end up creating YouTube channels trying to teach people about life in Japan. But in fact, their experience in this country is extremely narrow and limited and is not at all representative of what life in Japan can really be like. On the one hand, it's because these types of jobs are generally a form of glorified tourism. You're coming here to live in this country for a short period of time and travel around and getting to know the country, and at the same time you're using that job as a way to make some money on the side, which, if you think about it, is a pretty sweet deal. But on the other hand, many of these companies are specifically tailored to deal with this type of foreigners, which means that they'll set you down a specific path to have a specific kind of experience when you're living and working in this country. Now, of course, I'm not talking about everyone, but you'll find that this is a fairly common occurrence. And now, on the other hand, it's also worth mentioning that many of these companies are famous for not offering the most favorable working conditions. And many of them have also been involved in some unfortunate situations in the past. So, keeping all these things in mind, you can see how from the beginning you could be set up to work under very difficult conditions. And so it ends up becoming kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where you keep living and working under very bad conditions because you're initially doing the wrong thing to begin with. The things that bring you those conditions in the first place. And so the point I'm trying to make is that when you're out there on YouTube or any other social platform and you're watching videos by people who claim to know everything about Japan, including myself, take it with a grain of salt, because generally these experiences are just a very narrow sliver of the kind of experiences that you can actually have in this country. And so that's why I'm here, to give you a different sliver, a different point of view, what I would consider to be a more valuable and objective point of view of what life in Japan can actually be like. Now, in my personal case, those of you who follow me, you know that I've been living in this country for a reasonable amount of time, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to create a business that offered us enough financial freedom from early on. Now, I know, and I'm perfectly aware, that these are conditions that might not be available or accessible to everyone right off the bat. And maybe there are some of you who are not even interested in being in that position. But the fact is that this has allowed us to enjoy the great side of Japan, the great aspects of life in Japan, without having to endure the more challenging things, like I mentioned earlier. Because I know for a fact that there is no place on planet Earth where the reality of visiting a place is nice, but actually living there is not as nice as you thought, doesn't apply. Every place is going to have things that are going to make you think, how can people live like this? This is absolute hell. And if you live, for example, in Europe, you know what those things are. If you live in America, you know what those things are. And even if you live in South America, you know what those things are as well. And believe me, I can talk about this with great authority because I've lived in all of these places for very long, formative and important years of my life. And so I know the reality of these places very well. So, for example, in the case of Japan, many people complain that coming to live and work in Japan, you're going to be subject to a terrible work culture and you'll never be integrated into society and you'll never be actually part of your community as a whole. And while there might be some truth to that, I've often realized through my personal experience that the problem often lies in my own abilities, in my own skills, and what I can offer society. Take, for example, like I mentioned earlier, the case of English teachers, which is something that many people come to Japan to do to enjoy their life in the country.
Currently, I'm an assistant language teacher at a high school.
Okay. And how much do you currently make?
Right now, about $320,000 per month. I think I'll earn a little bit more because it requires more specialization, so definitely much more, like $3,000 or so.
And why is that?
Because you have to get certified to be any type of teacher in the United States versus Japan. You just need a degree and speak the language and you're pretty much in.
Now, please keep in mind that I'm talking specifically about foreigners who come work in Japan, because the life of a Japanese employee is going to be vastly different from this. But that's not your position and it's not my position either, so let's move on. Now, as you can see, this person is clearly saying that back home things would be better, because back in her country you have to be qualified to become a teacher, which means you're going to get better paid for it. Whereas in Japan, they'll actually hire anyone as long as you have a degree. And I'm not talking about a degree in pedagogy, a degree in education, or a degree in languages. I'm talking about any kind of degree in anything, without any kind of proper or related qualifications. And then many of them, of course, start complaining about their salaries and their working conditions, when in reality the truth is that they're not even properly qualified to do the job they were hired to do. How to teach a language properly, the basis of communication. And so if I'm in that position, I'm also going to think, well, of course my working conditions are bad because I have actually nothing to offer. My skills are my currency, and this is all I can afford with the skills I have. Think about it the other way. Maybe you'd like to go live in Europe or in America and you're chasing the American dream, but you're absolutely unqualified to do anything other than get the opportunities that offer you the worst working conditions and the worst living conditions, despite what you think you might deserve. You're going to end up feeling the same way. Anyone would. And you're going to end up hating your surroundings, saying that living in that country is also hell despite being the supposed land of opportunity. And the problem is that many people, at least in the case of Japan, many people fantasize the idea of what living in Japan is going to be like. And you think it's all going to be wonderful and that every day of your life from now on is going to be like an episode of Sailor Moon. I don't know, I'm not very familiar with anime. But in any case, they tend to forget and to set aside the fact that Japan is a very real place with real people and real problems. However, having said that, having worked here for such a long time and working on my own business for such a long time in this country, it has reassured me in the fact that Japan is a wonderful country with great things to offer. And I'm not only talking about the things that everyone talks about, the great food and the great attractions and the flowers and all these things, but talking about things that actually have a great impact on your day-to-day life. For example, I have a number of friends and acquaintances who are on the more wealthy side of things. Far more than I am. It's a whole different level. And over the years, many of them have actually decided to leave their countries and come live in Japan. And why do you think that is? Is it because the yen is low and now everything is cheap in Japan? Come on, they have all the money they could ever need. And even if the yen was high, it wouldn't even make a difference. They have all the money they could ever have. But they know that coming to live in Japan, the country is going to offer them great things that's going to greatly and positively impact their quality of life. And when you take advantage of those things, your quality of life is going to be second to none. If you consider things like the efficiency, the respect, and the unmatched service and attention to detail. And if you're, for example, thinking about having a family, then think about the stability, the security, the safety, the fact that you can take the train or you can have your children take the train by themselves without being worried that anything is going to happen to them. The cleanliness, the punctuality, the fact that everything works as intended, and the way that people treat each other with kindness and consideration every single day. Ultimately, these are all things that allow you to live a more peaceful life and that have allowed me to enjoy the fruits of my labor without having to be constantly concerned for my own survival or the well-being of my loved ones. So I consider myself to be extremely fortunate to live in this country and to enjoy a quality of life, both at home and on the streets, that I would not very easily trade for anything else. But then again, it all comes down to your currency, the skills that you have to be able to afford that peace, that freedom, and that quality of life. And there are always things you can do. There are always skills you can and should learn. Never think it's too late, and never blame your surroundings for your circumstances. Never blame the country you're in or the country you want to go to for not adapting to your expectations. I mean, sure, your surroundings do play a role, but it's ultimately your responsibility to take control and change your circumstances. And if you'd like to follow the advice of others who are far more intelligent and experienced than I am, then read, learn new valuable skills, grow, and become stronger. And if you'd like to learn which specific skill I use to get ahead in life, then make sure you go and watch this video right here. Don't miss it, and in the meantime, take care, and I'll see you next time.